Okay, I think we've given everyone a good opportunity to join, so we'll start the webinar now. So firstly, hello everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar. This is the second episode of our Behind the Story series, where we speak to our customers about their use of shorthand and the process behind creating their amazing digital stories. I'm Dawn, VP of Customer Success here at Shorthand, and I'll be your host for today. We are joined by two members of the Imperial College London Media Relations team who will introduce themselves shortly. Hi, Joanna. Hi, Debbie. Joanna and Debbie are going to walk us through the creation of their story, COVID-19, 6 months on the front line. This was nominated and won the Best Education Story category in the 5th Annual Shorthand Awards. The webinar will last around 30 minutes in total. I'll go through Q&A for the majority of the time, but I will try and save a few minutes at the end for audience questions. So if you do have any questions at all at any point during the session, then do pop them in the Q&A or the chat function, and then we'll pick those up. So now I'd like to introduce you to our speakers today. Debbie, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Hi, I'm Debbie Evanston. I'm the Press and Communications Manager at Imperial College London. So I have a focus on strategic and corporate communications. So I do a lot of things that kind of draw together different strands from across the college into pieces like this.
Thank you. Joanna, would you like to go next?
Thanks, Dawn. Hi, everyone. I'm Joanna Wilson, and I'm the press officer in the same media relations team as Debbie, so also looking at our corporate media relations. I've been at the college for about 3 years now, and I've been very lucky to have done quite a few pieces on shorthand in that time, but this one is probably my favourite.
Brilliant. Good reason we're talking about that one today then. Lovely. So before we talk about the specific COVID-19 6 months on the frontline story, firstly, can you tell us how long you've been using shorthand for and what you actually use shorthand for?
Yeah, I can take this one. So we launched a platform called Imperial Stories in October 2019, and that is our digital long-form storytelling platform, which is powered by shorthand. It was championed by our colleague Andrew Youngson, who's the news and campaigns manager, and he really loves shorthand and wanted to get us all using it. So we've been using it for a couple of years now, and we use shorthand to tell more off-diary stories. So when we have, for example, a new piece of research or an event that's happened at the college, we'll write a standard news story, which will be built on our CMS, and that will go on our website. But when we want to take a step back and have a look at something in a bit more detail, that's when we turn to shorthand and make an imperial story. So we use it a lot for telling stories about our research. For example, I recently did a piece about sleep for World Sleep Day. So rather than just looking at one piece of sleep research, I brought together all the different researchers across the college who were looking at sleep. And as we've grown and used shorthand more, it's not just the press office that uses shorthand. We're lucky to be able to have colleagues from across the college using the platform. And we use it for not just news now, but also campaigns. For example, we had a campaign called Shifting the Lens, and that's running 2 cycles now. And that is a celebration of cultural diversity at the college. We also use it for student recruitment, reaching out to alumni and doing public affairs. So we've been really lucky. We've got a nice broad mix of use cases that we use shorthand for.
Fantastic. Great. Okay, well, we'll move into talking about the story itself then that we're here to talk about. So what I will do is I'll just put that story on screen so that we can look at that while we talk today. And for everyone listening or for those watching when it's pre-recorded and put onto YouTube, there is a link as well, so you can have a look through the story as we talk today. So first question around this story. Firstly, when did you decide to start this story, and what did you set out to achieve with this particular piece of content?
Yeah, I can take that one. So I think throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, Imperial's scientific contribution to the crisis has been significant, but also extremely wide-ranging. So it wasn't just our researchers, but we had sort of students who were helping out on NHS front lines. our medical students. So we wanted to bring all of that together in a sort of coherent way that would illustrate the breadth of the work going on and the human impact that that's had. We actually saw a Guardian long read piece early on, about 6 months into the pandemic, I think, and that was kind of cataloguing and capturing the first 100 days of the COVID-19 crisis and how it was unfolding. And we were sort of inspired by that to see if we could do something similar at Imperial. So tracking the developments as they unfolded and showing how Imperial's work contributed to that global response alongside some of those external milestones. And we knew we wanted to do an impactful piece of work that would stand the test of time. So we didn't want this to just be useful in a moment, but be something that we could continue to look back at and reflect on, and that, you know, years into the future, it would still be a piece that would catalogue that historic period of time really well, and captured the sort of breadth of work that was going on. And we knew we wanted it to be visually impactful as well, which is why Shorthand was really the platform for us to use. We wanted it to have a journalistic feel. So, you know, we used some of those external milestones to map the key points alongside. And we wanted it to show the human impact of this and how Imperial's research is making a difference. So it was something we used in various different ways. I mean, I think in that time we've actually sent it to media who wanted a bit of an overview of Imperial's COVID research. It continues to be useful to share with our key stakeholders and our alumni who are interested in how Imperial's work is contributing to the global response. So it's definitely stood the test of time so far. It's been really good.
Fantastic. It's really interesting actually to pick up on that journalistic point, because I think actually when this story was submitted to us for the Shorthand Awards, we have lots of different categories. And I think the submission was made to many of those categories. So the education one and editorial as well. And it was actually quite difficult for us and the judges as well when we were looking at this story. It could be placed in so many of those different categories. It was a real, you know, as you said, quite a broad story that really talks about the breadth of what you have been doing at Imperial. So that's a really interesting point.
Oh, that's good. That means it's works, I suppose.
And what were your first steps for putting this story together? And can you kind of walk us through that process?
Yeah, I certainly can. So for context, this was published, I think the first week of July last year, and we'd started working on it in the May. Which now looking back seems like a remarkably short period of time to put all of this together, but I'll try and give a flavour of the kind of organisation that we needed in the planning stages in order to get this off the ground. So we started off, the way we do our shorthand pieces at the college is that we put together a pitch document. We have an editorial panel in-house who look at all of the pitches and decide if it's a go or not, and they give you feedback, let you know if it should just be a news story, things like that. So that was the first step, and that's really useful because it helps you to think about your audience who are going to be looking at the piece, helps you to think about the assets that you might want to use, and also to think about timeline for the project so you can kind of get all of your ducks in a row. So the second thing, once we'd done that pitch document and got some feedback from our colleagues, was to gather all of the content, which was an absolutely huge undertaking. Even in mid-May, you know, given that was only about 5-6 months into the pandemic, Imperial had already produced a huge amount of research. Our students had made loads of contributions on the front line. We'd had startups pivoting to help. So we had a huge volume. And it was clear that Imperial was really going to be at the forefront of contributing to the pandemic and trying to help. And we had to be selective because we knew that we wouldn't be able to cover everything. So what we did is made a huge table. And we're going to talk about this a little bit more in more detail later about the timeline aspect. But we knew that we wanted it to be chronological. So we made a huge table which had about 70 different key moments from the 31st of December 2019 when the outbreak was first declared in Wuhan up till about May. So we started plotting those. They were all color coded, whether they were to distinguish whether they were an external milestone, an internal milestone, such as a new piece of research being published. We also leaned on our colleagues. For example, I spoke to someone in our vaccine development team to get their timeline of when they first decided to start making a vaccine for COVID-19, that kind of thing. So for each of the 70 or so items, we had a look at what existing content there already was. So for a lot of the text, we managed to crib from previously published news stories, because the press office was very busy and was producing a lot of content. So we were able to take some stuff from that. And we also made a note of what assets we had, be that photos, be that podcast, video, and that was a really key stage. So once we'd gathered all of the content and plotted it all out, it was to think about how this was going to look on the page when it was published. So we had a look back through what photos our in-house photographer had taken. So we're lucky to have a really fantastic photographer, and he'd been out there capturing a lot of great images on campus and in our partner hospital sites. So we're really lucky to have those. But because we knew that the images were so important at this stage, we were also looking for stock images. For example, of the wet market in Wuhan, of people on public transport wearing masks, that kind of thing. So once we had gathered all of that content, which took a huge amount of time, we were ready to start writing. And one thing that's really important to mention, I think, is that as we were writing, we weren't just thinking about the words, we were also thinking, like I said, about how it's going to look at the page. So our draft document was color-coded. It had notes all over it to show this image can go for this section, this quote should be used as a pull quote, embed this bit of podcast here. So we had this shared document, and that's how we worked through it. So that was the kind of planning stage. I think that really helped when it came to writing and then building it in shorthand, that we had spent a lot of time meticulously going through step by step, slowly.
Can I ask what the you mentioned the shared document that you used? What software did you use, or what tool did you use for that?
So we were just on a Word document on SharePoint. So we had lots of shared folders on SharePoint. And I'll come back to that a little bit later when we discuss challenges. But that was something to get used to, learning to work with a colleague when you're not in the same office, to try and produce something when you're doing it all kind of via SharePoint.
Brilliant. So what makes this story different from the other COVID content that you had published before? And maybe just while you're answering this one, I might just scroll through the story a little bit so the audience can start to see the different types of media you had in it as well.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, I'd just like to say it's longer than anything we've ever produced before. I think it might be the longest Imperial story we've produced, though I'd have to check that. Obviously, it's hugely long. It's cataloguing 6 months worth of work, but we really wanted this to be a kind of overarching, defining piece that would pull together lots of different strands to tell a sort of full or bird's eye view of Imperial's response to COVID. So we had loads of amazing stories that our colleagues in the press office have written over that 6 months about Imperial's research, lots of pieces of work, lots of things like podcasts and beautiful photography. I think we even had some videos. So there was loads for us to work with. So we really wanted to take that great content and pull it into one place so that it could become that kind of overarching piece. So it was a real sort of sounds silly to say off diary when it's a timeline, but it was a proper off diary kind of, how can we make the most impactful piece possible with this content and some new content. Also, I suppose one thing that was a little bit, it's not like totally unheard of, but it was more unusual, is that we really tried to map this against sort of external milestones. So we did try and keep it a bit journalistic, like we weren't just talking about Imperial's research, but we were talking about some of the key developments in the UK just more generally. And also at our own institution. I think there's a section in there about when Imperial closed its doors, for example, or moved to remote operations, I should say. So it was a more unusual piece, I think, for us, and to kind of catalogue it in a timeline way is something we've not really done before as well. So a lot of firsts for this piece, I think.
Brilliant. And how did you come up with the idea for the timeline? And who in the team worked on this component?
Yeah, well, like I said earlier, we did seek a bit of inspiration from the piece we saw. I think, like I say, I think it was in The Guardian, where they'd sort of taken it on a sort of timeline sort of in a timeline sort of way. But we quickly became aware that there was so much content, like Joanna said, that we couldn't do everything. So we started to just pinpoint the key moments and pull it together that way. So Joanna and I were kind of mapping those out, and we came up with an interim solution, I think, at first, where we had some sort of like lines that would join up different sections of text with the kind of dates bolded. And that's looked to us like that looked great. And then basically we sought the advice of one of our in-house front-end developers who correctly established that he could probably make it look much prettier and whizzier and more impactful, which he did. So he did a bit of work on the coding side of things that I just can't possibly claim to understand, and develop this timeline that moves in the way that you see. And I mean, the result is obviously it looks beautiful. So yeah, we're really pleased with it.
Fantastic. And that's a really interesting point, is that, and I know we spoke about this previously, but sort of how you use something like shorthand to tell these kinds of stories, and how, I suppose, how might you have tackled a story like this before shorthand, and did having a tool like this make it easier to create this kind of story?
Yeah, I mean, Joanna, I don't know what you think, but I don't think we could have done something exactly like this without shorthand. So it was kind of essential to have the tool that would enable us to make something so visually impactful like this, and to have a platform that would enable us to write these sort of long form pieces with such beautiful visuals as well.
Fantastic. And did you face any challenges when you put this story together? And if so, how did you overcome them?
Yes, there are a few challenges. So one that I've just mentioned is navigating this new world of working from home and collaborating remotely. So as I mentioned earlier, we started working on this in May last year. So we'd been working from home for about 2 months at that point. Normally, Debbie and I work very closely together. So normally for a project like this, we would probably go and book a meeting room, sit together, map it all out on a piece of paper, and look over each other's shoulders at our computers and nudge each other until we'd written the piece and worked together that way. Obviously, that wasn't possible, so we had to find a way to be productive and still be able to share ideas together, even while not being together and being on other sides of London. So it was a lot of screen sharing, a lot of writing sprints together. So we would both go into the SharePoint Word document and say, right, we're going to meet at 3 p.m. So by then we need to have written this section, this section, this section. And I think I would say that now looking back, we probably work together a lot better now because we've had these experiences, and we've had to adapt the way that we work. So it was a challenge at first, but I think it's definitely kind of helped us now. And obviously, now 18 months later, we are still working and collaborating remotely. So it put us in good stead for that. Another challenge is just the volume that we had to deal with and knowing when to stop. So we had, when we started, in our mind that it was going to be about 6 months that we wanted to look at. But as we were coming to the end of writing, more things kept happening. So I think in June, things started opening up a bit and lockdown was coming to an end. So we wanted to get that in there. There were new trials starting at Imperial. There were things happening with vaccines. So it was knowing when to stop. And I think in the end, we did go to the end of June. So it was probably just in there in the 6 months, but that was a bit tricky, but we stuck to our guns. And then the final challenge kind of related to that is managing expectations. So even once we had published the piece, we were contacted saying, oh, this could have been included, this would have been nice to be in there, and just managing those internal stakeholders and telling them what our mission was with this piece, kind of explaining to them that we couldn't include everything because there would just be so much. And, we had to, even in the editing process, we cut out a huge amount to make it as readable as possible, because, if Debbie and I had been given free rein, we probably could have written about 10,000 words. But just, keeping it focused on the audience and what they're going to want to enjoy and how they're going to read it. Because if you're reading something like this on your phone, you do not want to spend hours and hours reading a dissertation length of writing, and then telling that to our internal stakeholders. But yeah, while there were challenges, it's something that we're really proud of. And I think the way that we work together on this, and we work with colleagues across our comms division and outside of the comms division, has really kind of helped us in this world we're living in now.
Real well done on this story. It's fantastic, and I know I really loved how you had the the what's next at the end. And I mean, do you see people coming back to this content frequently as well? You mentioned kind of stakeholders are still referencing it internally. Would you describe this piece of content as kind of, I know it's for a particular moment in time, but is it evergreen? Are people continually coming back to read what happened during that time?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's certainly what we wanted to, and what we set out to do. And I feel like we have done that, because obviously it's clearly time stamped in that it's the first 6 months, but I think that will continue to be interesting long after those first 6 months because it sort of tells the story really of the start of the pandemic, which is obviously a dreadful time for lots of reasons, but is also like of historical significance. So I think it's got fantastic feedback. So as far as we're concerned, yeah, we think it's been a great success, really.
Good. And just mentioning kind of other content, I know that you've got your more stories. You always have a collection section at the bottom of your stories as well that links you through to other content. So I know you can include everything in the story, and we often urge other storytellers, when sort of getting to think about what they're going to concentrate on any one story, is you're right, you can't achieve everything. A story can't do everything. So you really need to narrow down that focus and think, what do I want to achieve with this story? What's my objective? And with this story, do you feel that you achieved what you kind of set out to do with it?
Yeah, definitely. From my perspective, it was a huge undertaking. And at times, yeah, like you say, it was difficult to kind of pull everything together and feeling like it wasn't just ending up chaos. But the feedback we've got has been really, really good. It's been useful, like I say, for a lot of different parts of Imperial to share with their key stakeholders. People still continue to point to it now as a kind of sort of defining story for us in terms of capturing the key moments in that kind of central way. And yeah, it's a narrative piece that stands on its own, and that's really what we set out to do. So I'm really pleased with it. I'm really proud of it. Yeah, so it was great to win an award for it as well.
Fantastic. No, congratulations again. And you were both fairly new to Shorthand when you started creating this story. I know you've gone on to create a number of stories since, but what would be your sort of one tip or learning that you would share with others, maybe just starting out using, starting to tell digital stories or starting to use a tool like Shorthand?
I mean, I could probably give you a whole host of tips of things that we learned from this, but I would say the one most important thing is to think about images and how you want the piece to look right at the start. I think that needs to be built into your planning process, your drafting process, and then that will help you when you're building the piece in Shorthand, because if you don't have strong images or video, then I don't think that your digital storytelling will be successful. So I think don't leave that to the last minute, and as you're opening and logging into Shorthand, and think that you can just copy and paste the text over and bung in a few images. I think to really think carefully about the images that you want to use, and see that as a really important part of the process, which I think is something that Debbie and I, because we're press officers and words are our thing, but this taught us to really think about the visual side of things. And it's also just nice to get to be creative, you know, to not just think about words, but to also think about how things are going to look and how to make things look beautiful, which I think we did with this piece. So that would be my top tip.
Yeah, just to echo what Joanna said, there were actually points where we would actually, when we were trying to be kind of a bit ruthless in cutting it down, there were points where we would take things out if we just didn't have a suitable or impactful enough image to go alongside it. I think it's kind of important to be that, to have that sort of high threshold for imagery, really, because it does, pieces like this, I think they stand on the back of the visual assets, really.
Definitely. And I know you use a lot of third-party tools like Infogram in other stories to, you know, add a bit of interactivity into other content pieces that you're putting together. And essentially you storyboard this, didn't you? Before you started, you were plotting out exactly what you were going to say and what the visual would be at that time. So yeah, storyboarding for digital storytelling. It's definitely a skill. Do you feel like you've got better at it as you've gone on? Because I feel like where certain people maybe start with this, it can be quite a hard thing to learn, maybe. So yeah, how has that kind of felt like as you've told more stories?
I think one thing I've learned is that you need to give yourself the time. I think, you know, me and Debbie and probably the rest of the press office often play a bit fast and loose with our work, and, you know, we're churning things out quite quickly. So often you don't have the time to sit down and storyboard something because you just got to get something out quickly. But I think one thing it's taught us is to give yourself, you know, the time to really think about the whole piece holistically. But it's definitely a skill, and it's definitely something that we have developed. But I think we've got I think we're getting better at it, I'd say.
I quite like the use of the word storyboarding there, which definitely isn't what I thought we were doing, but I suppose it is what we were doing. Yeah, sounds a lot more thought through rather than just trying to organize the chaos, which is what it felt like. But that's a technique we would definitely use again. It helps so much, just keeping us on track as well, and not going off down like random side avenues because we found something else to include, but to actually keep us focused on the key moments.
Brilliant. And we're just coming up to the sort of end of time, but we do have a couple of questions, so I'll try and cover a couple of them before we have to go. Lots of comments just saying thank you very much. It's been really interesting to listen to you. A few people saying it's their favorite story. So thank you for talking about it today. One person just said, what are you working on now? What's your kind of next story that we can look out for?
Oh, Joanna, you're working on one at the moment. Do you want to take this one?
Yes,
if you're allowed
I'm
to
actually,
say.
yeah, I've been working on one at the moment, just this afternoon actually, which is about the college's links with the Olympics and Paralympic Games, and it's current students who are competing, past successes. So look out for that. That will be published, fingers crossed, early next week.
And we did do a sort of, it's not exactly a follow-up to this one, but we did do a kind of lessons learned from a year of in a pandemic, which kind of it didn't go in a timeline, but it was a sort of similar sort of piece, because basically another 6 months had elapsed and loads more had happened, and there's a danger you could just do timelines forever, so we thought we'd take a little bit of a different approach to that one, but similar kind of idea, just trying to capture everything in one place.
Fantastic. And another question, what's to both of you, what's your favorite section type within shorthand that you like using?
Oh, I'm gonna forget what they're all called.
This is probably not a very eloquent answer, but I really enjoy just text over media. I just think when you've got a really strong, beautiful image, I mean, you know, I know it's just a subheading, but I think that really brings the piece together when you've got it sectioned by strong images, a nice, cleverly thought out subheading. I mean, obviously, we all love scrollmation and reveal, but yeah, I think I have a soft spot for a nice text over media.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that, to be honest, because it is really about showcasing the images, really, then. And I do like some of the more wizzy things you can do, like, don't get me wrong, but when you've got such strong assets, it's nice to be able to give them a bit of breathing room and just show them for what they are.
Fantastic. Well, in the interest of time, we'll stop there. There were a couple of other questions, so I might pick those up with you afterwards. If anyone has any questions or comments or feedback, then they can reach out to us at success@shorthand.com as well, and be more than happy to carry the conversation on kind of elsewhere. But thank you so much, Debbie. Thank you so much, Joanna, for talking about your stories today. We will be continuing this series as well, so we will be running another one of these webinars next month, so we'll post details about that shortly. But thank you everyone for joining, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. And if you're in the UK, I hope you can try and keep cool. It's very hot at the moment. Thanks everyone. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.